Okay, so I'm just going to follow the usual thing that I do with these, which is basically I start from Vedic Valence, so start with the 2nd century and move to Lily, to the 17th century. So we go over like a 1500-year period, and we look at what all the significations kind of represent. I don't think that we're going to find too many surprises. Like I remember we found some interesting surprises with Venus when we found out that Venus, really that the focus was on Venus as kind of a pleasure monger and wastrel, as opposed to love goddess. And I think with this, though, we really get into the aspect of Mars in a few ways. One, as a bloodletter, because Mars represents the running of blood. So anything that makes the blood run, right? So cuts, surgery, those kinds of things. Obviously, as we can see, the very first thing, force, wars, plunderings, right? So this is 2nd century. We're already starting with Ares as god of war, right? Oh, sorry about that. Screams and violence. So here's our reaction to the violence and the violence itself. Also, one of the things that I have come to understand about Mars represents loud noises. And so there's screams. Often when I've seen, I remember doing a horary for a friend of mine, and she was asking about her roommate, and the significator for the roommate was an Aries. And I said, does this person have a loud voice? And she's like, oh my God, she has such a loud voice. So loud sounds, especially when we're dealing with Aries, certainly not with Scorpio, right? Because Scorpio is what? Scorpio is mute. Whoring, so this whole thing with licentiousness, now this is maybe a little bit of a surprise. Whoring, but actually I think really what they're really talking about is that Mars is the one who is lawless and who traverses, Mars is the one who traverses the boundary into lawlessness. And so whoring is a way of being lawless in the area of sexual, in the area of the sexual matters, right? So whoring is a type of lawlessness. Loss of property, banishment, exile, alienation from parents. So all of that can be as a result of contentions. And remember, Mars represents arguments and contentions, any kind of disaffection, any kind of alienation, right? So any kind of harmony is being represented by Venus. Any kind of disharmony, any kind of like a banishment where you would be sent away because there's no disharmony, that's Mars. Exile, you're put away because you've maybe broken the law and done something against the law or done something against the king, right? People that are, prisoners that are put into exile usually have done something to break the law of the present regime. And then alienation from parents, that obviously contention is involved in that. Capture, the death of wives, which is interesting. Abortions, which makes perfect sense, right? Because the blood makes blood run, and it's also the death of something. And it's violence to the fetus. Love affairs and marriages, isn't that interesting? Now that comes from the connection of Venus and Mars together and representing kind of sexual scandal. But once again, this comes back to the idea of whoring, love affairs and marriages. It kind of represents maybe not the typical kind of Venus marriage, but maybe marriages that are done very quickly as a result of passion, hot sex, very passionate marriages where we fuck and fight. The loss of goods. So, and that kind of deals with the issues of theft, which goes back to lawlessness. Lies and vain hopes, same thing. Lies especially goes with lawlessness. Vain hopes, now that's another thing. I don't know where that kind of comes from, but maybe we'll see something else that kind of comes to it. I did see something in Bonatti that talked about when Mars, how the kind of, what did he say? It was the state of mind that a negative Mars, and the negative Mars state of mind was a very conflicted, obviously, right? Mars represents conflict. So that might have something to do with this aspect of vain hopes. Strong armed robbery. So Mars is the bandit, is the robber, is the highway robber, the highwayman. Looting, quarrels among friends, anger, fighting. There's the contention aspect. Verbal abuse. Mars is abusive. It's anger. It's violence. And it can also be verbal. Hatred, obviously, the opposite of love is hate, or the opposite of love is really indifference. But for our purposes, we can use Mars for hatreds, which of course is another aspect for contentions, and lawsuits are formal contentions. Mars brings violent murder. So here he is with violence, slashings, and bloodshed, right? There's the bloodshed aspect of Mars. And I think I've already told this story, but I'm going to tell it one more time. So during my first pilgrimage in India, I went to, I did my first pilgrimage in India. My main pilgrimage was to these 9 temples in Tamil Nadu called the Navgraha temples. Navgraha means 9 planets. They include Rahu and Ketu. And so there's a temple for each, planet. Well, there's a temple, almost all of the temples are Shiva temples, but they all have shrines to one of the gods or to one of the planets. So I went to this, as you might remember, I went to this temple for Mars, and the minute that I take off my shoes and step onto the steps, I bang my foot and cut it really badly and start bleeding. And the first thing I think is, Mars is certainly in this place. Then I go to the tank. There's always water with a temple. So you go into the water first, and then you go into the temple. So I go into the tank and clear off my feet, and then I go to the Mars shrine. And at the Mars shrine, it's surrounded by families, and everybody is arguing. So Mars was absolutely present. Then later on, when I told this story in my Vedic astrology course, or my Vedic astrology clubhouse thing, that guy CS, who I've talked to you about, says, were you in your Mars dasha during the time? And indeed I was in my actual Mars dasha, my planetary period. People go there to argue maybe. No, I don't think they do. I think they just kind of, they don't go there to argue. It just kind of happens that way. But it turns out that I was in my major planetary period of Mars, my 7-year Mars period during this first pilgrimage, and Mars is ruler of the 12th house, and the 12th house rules the feet. And so my feet were cut at the Mars temple. All right, so Mars brings violent murders, slashing, and bloodshed. So there Mars is with the bloodshed and the murder and the violence and the violence. Attacks of fever, right? Why would there be attacks of fever and ulcerations and boils? Because Mars is hot, is exceedingly hot. So he has so much heat that he can create fevers. He's hot and dry, so he can create hot, dry fevers, and he can create so much heat that it can create pustules and boils. And also think about acne. When we look at really bad cases of acne, usually the color is a bright red, and Mars rules the color red. Burns, chains, torture. Plus you need to lance boils. Excellent, fantastic. Yes, absolutely, Layla. Exactly. Burns, chains, and torture makes sense. Masculinity, Mars is one of the masculine planets. False oaths. And so remember, we had false dreams, but falsehood, falseness. So now we're getting an idea of why when Mercury is with Mars, we can find lying, we can find criminality, because Mercury always takes on the nature of whoever he's with. And he's common to good and bad. So if Mars is inclined to some of these negative things, then Mercury will also take those things on. And of course, Mercury-Mars can also be a soldier. So false oaths, wandering, we're going to talk about that in a second. Embassies under difficult circumstances, obviously, any kind of distress, right? Mars rules distress and danger. So any kind of danger and distress, Mars rules. Actions involving fire or iron, right? Mars rules iron, and then obviously Mars is a fiery planet. He's hot and dry, which is of the same nature as the element of fire. Craftwork and masonry. So when we get to the Mars professions, we're going to find ourselves revisiting this idea of fire and iron and masonry and craftwork. And so now the temperament of Mars is hot and dry, as we just mentioned. It's of the choleric temperament, which is the hot and dry temperament. The tattva or element is fire or Agni, and Mars is the principle of fire as heat. Now, a month ago, when we looked at the sun, we saw that sun is also Agni tattva and choleric temperament, but that the sun was the principle of fire as light. So I don't know if we've ever talked about the connection between the planets the chakras and the elements. So we talked about it actually in planetary magic. But keep remembering that in the earth element, we have Mercury and the Lagna, and the ascendant. In the water element, which is, so earth element is the first chakra, so Mercury and the Lagna. Second chakra is the water element, we have Venus and Moon. Third chakra is the fire element, and we have Sun and Mars. And so that's how we can differentiate. Sun is fire through heat, and Sun is fire through light, Mars is fire through heat. Air element, Saturn and Rahu. And then Jupiter. Now some say Jupiter and Ketu for the space or Akasha element. But ultimately, this is kind of a way to be thinking about, if you've got a problem, once again, if you've got a problem with a planet, it might be a good idea to go to the chakra and the element and work with it. So for instance, if you've got a Venus problem, then you've got a second chakra problem, and you've got a water element problem, right? So just another way to kind of be the same. So same thing with this. If you've got a Mars issue, you've got a fire problem and a third chakra problem. So for instance, when I moved into this apartment here in Cancun, it was an Aries rising chart with Mars Sun conjunct in Libra in the 7th house. And that gave me a lot of, that gave me pause. I wasn't really very happy with that, because certainly if I were to, find a boyfriend or something like that, or whatever, obviously that Mars Venus, that Mars Sun thing would show up. But the very first thing that I thought of when I saw it, I was like, God, so much fire, even though they were both in detriment. And of course, that means that they can act even more wayward, right? But the thing that I thought, and the thing that I ended up doing about maybe 2 or 3 months later, I thought, this is probably a really good place for me to be doing homam, or Agnihotra, or fire ceremony. And so for the past 2 months, I've been doing fire ceremony every day. And so this is kind of this is another way that we can kind of be looking at some of these things that we're dealing with. So if you're looking in your own chart and you know that you've got something that you're feeling frustrated with, look to the element, and the element is always connected to a chakra, and you can work with the chakra via the color, etc. So just something to just keep thinking about when we're looking at correspondences, when we're looking at these things.
Antoine?
Yeah.
Which chakra rules the throat?
So the throat chakra is the 5th chakra. Its color is blue, like a sky blue, or light, like a royal blue or a sky blue. And Jupiter is, and so its element is what we call the space or Akash element, or sky. And Jupiter is the ruler of that element, or Jupiter is the ruler of Akash. Also, sometimes they think Ketu. So you could work with Jupiter, or if you're having a problem with the Jupiter, if you're having a problem, here's the other thing, you can do it the other way around. Let's say you've got constant issues with the throat, or you've got constant issues with digestion. Right? If I've got or you've got constant issues with your reproductive area, cysts and all. So if you got constant issues with your reproductive area, that's the 2nd chakra and the water element. You have constant issues with the throat, that's the space element and the 5th chakra. You have constant digestive issues, that's the fire element and the 3rd chakra. So even more ways that we can be bringing these correspondences in. But yes, 5th chakra is the throat. And that's also, as I said, the Akash or space, and that's also connected to Jupiter. So Mars rules Aries and Scorpio, and his detriments are Libra and Taurus, right? The opposite of Aries and Scorpio. And then he's exalted in Capricorn and fallen in Cancer. So generally, like the old guys, like Abu Mashar, Al-Qabizi, all of the old medieval, pre-European medievals, they almost always say a bad one. I mean, Al-Qabizi just outright says a bad one, right? Mars is malevolent. That's one of the first things. So, right, so we're in the actual realm of malefic, of the malefic.
And so this is just the planet itself. It doesn't have to do with sort of like whether it's well placed or whether it's not.
Exactly.
It's just how it behaves in general. Okay.
its natural nature. And that's an excellent point or question regarding a distinction, because remember that the whole nature of Mars is based on some level on the placement of the signs ruled by Mars in connection to the signs ruled by the lights. So if you remember when we looked a long time ago, when we looked at aspects, we realized that each aspect had the nature of a planet. And do you remember which aspect had the nature of Mars?
Yeah, it's a square.
Absolutely, fantastic. And that's because Scorpio squares Leo and Aries squares Cancer, right? So if we think of the moon and the sun as the kind of the center, obviously, right? The sun is the center of the zodiac, or the center of everything, and the moon and the sun are, essentially, she's a reflection of him, so they're one unit. Then the relationship of all of the signs to that unit have implications for the planet who rules those signs. So indeed, Mars gets this 90-degree angle, which is an angle of stress and challenge.
Yeah.
And because Mars is also hot and dry, that stress and challenge takes on a violent aspect, because cholera is the gateway to violence. It's the gateway to fever. It's the gateway to hot-headedness. It's the gateway to losing our temper, right? Oh, she lost her temper. There we are. So that's what cholera kind of is about. So that's why Saturn creates malevolence in a completely different way. He creates it through obstacles and difficulties and obstacles and depression, because he's cold and dry. Right, so he's
and
cold.
delay too, right? Like one slows things down and one speeds
things. He's slow, right? Because he's slow, he's heavy, he's slow, he's heavy, he's far away, he's dark, right? So all of those kind of things. So we get to see now how these two planets show up. Just in the same way that when we were looking at Venus and Jupiter, or when we were looking at Venus, one of the things they say is that Venus and Jupiter are benefics because Venus creates benefit through pleasure and Jupiter creates benefit through increase. So we can look at the opposite with Mars and Saturn, and we can see that Mars creates malevolence through violence, interruption, disruption, contention. Saturn through delay, pessimism, withholding, denial, things of that nature. So they have very different qualities in and of themselves, but they're still both malefic. So that's a great question and very worth kind of making the distinctions that we kind of went into as a result. Okay, so choleric, as you can see, bitter in taste. And we're gonna come to that a little later. Fiery, obviously, hot and dry. Beautiful, strong. It's part of the man, the gallbladder. Okay, so we'll be looking at, we'll come back to this with the parts of the body, but gallbladder is almost all of them. Kidneys, although now kidneys is usually connected to Libra, but remember when we looked at Venus, we saw that really her bodily area was really the reproductive area. Sinews, testicles. Now look, he has the testicles, not the penis, but he has the testicles. And geographical regions, the fiery ones, things not hoped for, right? Things not hoped for. We don't want, when we're looking at something, let's say Venus has the penis, right? Who has the penis?
That should be the title of your next book.
Venus has the penis?
Yeah. Sexual astrology.
Oh, well, I did want to, well, I have another handle called Porn Astro.
You do?
I have another handle called Porn Astro. I was going to try to do a website where I went into the different astrology charts of gay porn actors and like what made people go into porn, and that's kind of where this thing about the looking at the astrological looking at people's kinks astrologically, like all of the Porn Astro thing was going to be about like everything sexual.
Super interesting.
That's funny. So torturer, right? Okay, so here we come, occupied in lawsuits and war and hangings, right? So I mean, really, we're not a lot of surprises, as I said. Torturers, one who prescribes a liar. Then we go back, a little libido. Isn't that interesting? A killer of,
Yeah, what's you?
that's very interesting. Now, maybe that's when he's at his worst, because I don't get that at all. I don't really get this
Yeah.
libido thing at all. A killer of seed in the woman, that makes sense because that's an abortion or a miscarriage. Expelling a premature embryo, there's an abortion or a miscarriage. Occupying diverse lands, a foreigner. So we're going to come to that in a second. Occupying the diverse lands, a foreigner. Lying in ambush for travelers. There's our highwayman or robber. Over middle siblings of full blood, a manager of horses and so this is one of the surprises. Mars and dealing well with animals. Now remember, Mars is in his joy in the 6th house, which has to do with animals, and so he was given to that. An excavator of tombs, that makes sense. A hanger of dead men, the executioner, and the like. And then, okay, so this is both, excuse me, Abu Mashar. So variety signifies youth and strength, sharpness of mind, heat and fires and burning up. So sticking with heat and fire. So pretty much whenever you're looking at a fire, whenever you're feeling the heat of a fire, you're dealing with Mars, right? The light of the fire is the sun. The heat of the fire is Mars, burning up everything which happens abruptly, right? So Mars might have more to do with almost as much to do, well, maybe not so much to do with speed, because of course we know the moon and Mercury have to do with speed, but with abruptness, things that happen suddenly. I think Mars has that. And a king of power and cleverness and the commands of leaders. Note that in countries like India, the kings almost always belong to what was called the Kshatriya caste. And the Kshatriya caste is the warrior caste. So commander of leaders, because almost always, think of even the United States, our first president was General George Washington. And so and we've had more than one general or more than one important military man become president. And you can probably see that in most countries where an important military person becomes president or becomes prime minister or something like that. And over injustice and subjugation and war and killing and fighting and courage, obviously endurance and the lust for glory. Remember that war, another word for glory was war, right? Or that was kind of like a euphemism used for war. And it was considered glory because of all of the loot that you could, all of the, the spoils that you could loot, right? So that issue of the spoils of war, the spoils of war was, especially in this period between the 5th century and the 18th or 19th century, war was one of the main coming home from war was one of the main ways you could make your fortune, right? You could go to war, and you take the gamble that, right, gold, glory, and God, that's right. So you could go to war, you would take the gamble. Would you come back? Would you come back in one piece? Would you come back poorer or richer? Right. So in the same way that people were going to far distant lands to seek their fortune, people were also going to war. What do we call the kind of person that can be hired for any army? We call him a mercenary. There's Mercury, right? So we've got this mercurial kind of business aspect to the warrior, this mercenary. And even there's a term called the merchant marines, which is when you work on a ship. And you work on a ship, but you're not actually in the military. You basically work on a ship, usually kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Shipping things back and forth, import export. So killing, fight, and courage, endurance, lust of glory, having his name be remembered, being raised up high in the instruments of war. So Mars can raise you high based on glory, based on the glory that you receive. Instruments of war. Compatriots mobilized for war, eagerness for wrongs and sowing discord. So discord, the opposite. So Mars, remember the Mars signs are opposite to the Venus signs. And Venus is always peace and harmony and love, and Mars is always the opposite of that. So it's discord, it's contention, it's disgruntledness, drinking parties and things on account of stealing and the cuttings of roads and courage. And so one of the main things that connections for Mars is courage in his best form. And so one of the things that I remember hearing Ben Dykes talk about was about how Mars at its best is a protector. and that Scorpio is actually the sign of the mother protecting its young. You know, Scorpio is a female sign, and so that's the mother bear or the mama bear who will protect its child in any way or in any way, and you know, she has to kill it in order to protect it. So he actually was connecting Scorpio with that. You know, we think obviously of the mother as the moon, but when he was thinking of this aspect of not Saturn, but Mars as protector, and as a feminine protector, he was using the Scorpio aspect of Mars. And so Mars at his best exhibits great courage and valor, and is a protector of those of the weak. Right. So when we see these things where we're looking at the highwayman, the robber, the murderer, the torturer, those are the negative aspects of Mars, but both are involved. A tendency to anger, treating the unlawful as being lawful, right? So the lawlessness, remember we were just talking about that. So when we get to Jupiter, what we're going to see, and if you remember when we talked about spirituality and the ninth house and everything in the traditional astrology course, we were talking about how Jupiter isn't really considered spirituality. Jupiter is considered following the law. Jupiter is is basically the reward that you receive for being obedient to the law. And so, and kind of so that's how kind of Jupiter kind of expands you, or Jupiter increases your whatever. It's because you're so law-abiding, you're so virtuous, and you receive such a good reputation. So people want to recommend you, people want to use you. But so that means that the planet before it, which is Mars, which is the lesser benefic, is about lawlessness. And note that Jupiter and Mars are enemies. Martyrdoms and being fettered. So martyrdom, right? Martyrs, what happens to martyrs? Martyrs all go through violence and are usually killed in a violent way. They're fed to lions, right? They are whipped or they're drowned, or they go through some kind of horrible, agonizing death. There's Mars. If it's agonizing, if it's painful, Mars is there. Being fettered, also whipping and prisons and restrictions, fugitives and defection, captivity and prisoners. So that's maybe a little bit different. This thing about fugitives, defections, exile, those things, these are things that we haven't really thought about for Mars. Maybe you would think about them more, maybe even Saturn, we might think, especially things like exile, right, where you're sent away on your own. But usually it's the result. Why, right? You've usually, like I said, transgressed an important law. And often when you are sent into exile, you are considered an enemy of the state, right? And Mars and enemies and enmity, right? Captivity and prisoners, fear, lawsuits, injustice, a tendency to anger and violence and recklessness and harshness and coarseness of emotion and capacity and persistence. So here's this connection with Mars and action. So capacity and persistence. But here's this aspect of Mars acting before thinking, and the scarcity of foresight, and quickness in matters, and having preconceptions, bad eloquence, and a ferocity of speech. So there's this aspect of rashness of Mars and rashness, foulness of words, and the lack of self-control in tongue. And the showing of esteem and friendship and taking joy in beauty, economy of speech, stratagem, etc. Let's just see if there's anything else. A scarcity of piety. If you remember when we talked about the ninth house, Mars represents, what's the opposite of piety? It's
impiety?
Dissent. So religious dissent. Usually if you see Mars connected with the ninth house, the person is not in connection. They might be an atheist. But there's been dissent around their religion. So let's see. Let me just see. Squaring up false self, which we've already looked at. Instability, changing of counsel, condition and condition. Scarcity of modesty, multitude of labor and vexation. Foreign journeys and the conditionary of solitary people and bad companionship. And fornication and the foulness. So can you see this kind of continuing stress on lawlessness? Fornication is against sexual laws of sexual propriety. Foreign journey isn't necessarily lawless, but remember that it was seen as a malefic experience to be away from home, to be away from the place of your home, the country of your home. That was seen as a malefic experience. That was seen as an impediment. And he signifies menstruation of women because the blood is running. Also divorce, right? And loss in a conception, and the cutting of the child in the womb, and premature birth. So now we know exactly what to look at when we're looking for premature birth, abortion, and for miscarriage. And of course, the signifies the middle brothers, managers of beasts and veterinary medicine. Look at that. And the shepherds of sheep, and the curing of wounds, and masteries of iron and work, and circumcision of boys, right, using sharp objects, and the plundering of the dead. So digging up tombs. That's another. So that's another thing I haven't seen. So here, Mars, male nocturnal, a bad one. He works heat, and he is a significator of brothers in foreign travel. That's what I wanted to come to. Well, brothers. Now we understand that Mars is the significator for brothers. Why do you think Mars is the significator for brothers?
Brothers are annoying.
Wow, that's actually maybe that's some hidden wisdom involved in that, but that is kind of true. Actually, it's based on the Chaldean order. And before we go to that for a second, I just want to show you, we're going to come back to this masteries, but notice that all of the masteries had to do with what you would do with heat and iron. And remember, we've talked about the blacksmith and how you'd have to burn it and then beat it, right? And both of those things is Mars. So here we are with Bonatti. Bonatti talks about why. Mars is therefore naturally the significator of brothers. Wait, so he is naturally the significator of brothers and pilgrimages. Okay, so brothers and pilgrimages. So nowadays, when we think of long distance travel, now, mind you, long distance travel is not necessarily a pilgrimage, right? So a pilgrimage is usually for a religious matter, but at the same time, pilgrimage and long distance travel can maybe be seen in a very similar way. It certainly is both connected to the ninth house. When we looked at the ninth house is when we first saw that Mars was the significator for pilgrimage. So we're going to look at why Mars is the significator for both brothers and pilgrimages. So Mars is the significator for brothers because Mars is the third planet in the Chaldean order. And if you remember, instead of using the alphabet zodiac, Aries equals first house, Taurus equals second house, what they actually used was the Chaldean order on the houses. So Saturn represented the first house because Saturn was the form giver. Jupiter represented the second house. Jupiter represented the second house, obvious reasons, because he's the significator for wealth. Mars represented the third house because he was the significator for brothers. So here we have it. Is therefore naturally the significator of brothers because brothers are the third accident which happens to a native after conception, namely after the nativity, which is the first house, and which the native loves more among all those things which can happen to him first. And so Mars is the third planet, which there is in order of the planets. So starting from Saturn, he follows Saturn, third in their order. And Mars is likewise the third planet who exercises his operation in the conceived child. So they believe that the child in the womb, that each planet would create certain things. And you can say, namely by operating in it through blood and reddening him. And he is the significator of pilgrimages because in pilgrimages happen many inconveniences to pilgrims and many distresses and plunderings and ungodly labors and the like, which are likened to the signification of Mars. So and he has of the age of men completed youth, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so one of the things that is so interesting about this and why pilgrimage, and so this is from a sacred site website, and it says to understand the enormous popularity of pilgrimages during the late medieval period of 12th to 15th century. Remember, Bonatti is writing in the 13th century. It's necessary to recognize the forces that have been shaping people's minds for many hundreds of years. The entire medieval period beginning in the 6th century had been a time of relentless war, Mars, abject poverty, Saturn, devastating famine, Saturn, near total illiteracy and ignorance, Saturn, infant mortality was high, Mars, life expectancy was low, Mars, and medicine was almost non-existent, so the absence of Mars, right? Because we're going to come to this because Mars is medicine. Life, even for the nobility, was extraordinarily difficult and demoralizing. There have been a thriving, okay, so we see that the Middle Ages was a hugely malefic condition, life condition, right? Or a life situation. Living through this Middle Ages was, even like he says, even for the nobility, life was difficult and demoralizing. And so as a result, pilgrimage, and he talks later on about this, about how, and at the same time, God or Jesus, because there's only one church, we're talking mostly in Europe. At this point, there's only the Christian church. So only Christianity is kind of the only succor, is the only balm that people had. And so starting in like the 5th or 6th century, one of the things that they were talking about was that instead of ruining sites, they started putting churches on top of pagan sites. So that instead of kind of fully kind of ruining things for them and creating and fomenting disillusionment or fomenting rebellion even, they would actually just kind of supplant Christianity. They would even use the same days that they would. So what they would do, they'd come in, they'd put a church on the side of the old temple. They would then find out what the necessary important days and then they would create a saint, and that saint would have those days. And so this created a mythology of saints, and then it also created a whole thing or a whole network of pilgrimage sites. And one of the most important during the Middle Ages was Salamanca, well, not Salamanca, but Santiago de Compostela. So the Santiago de Compostela, which started in Paris and ended almost all the way at the Mediterranean Sea in a part of Spain. And then, of course, the other most important one was the pilgrimage to the Holy Land, which is what started the Crusades, or the Crusades kind of started that pilgrimage thing. And that's where the Templars came, right? So the Templars are knights, and the St. John Hospitaller Knights. So all of those knights who basically would accompany pilgrims so that these negative things wouldn't happen to them. So this is why Mars is connected to pilgrimage. All right, so going on. So this is the Mars manner, Alcabisi. Injustice towards the wretched and the shedding of blood and oppressions by force and cutting of roads, right? We've already seen all this. Tendency to anger, leadership of armies, hastening in lightness and shamelessness and foreign travel outside the fatherland. So Mars, not Jupiter. Mars is really connected to traveling outside, to foreign travel. And the indulgence in because Mars is connected to wanderings, to wanderings, and the indulgence in intercourse, so fornication and the aborting of children, and middle brothers and sisters, and the knowledge and discernment and caring of beasts, where we are again, and qualities of the soul, provocation and disturbance. This is why if Mars is connected to the 9th house, this aspect of provocation and disturbance will characterize it, which if Saturn aspected him, it signifies hatred and great envy. And as you can see, this is all the same thing. Injuries of the, remember that Bonatti was collecting all this other wisdom, right? So, and often when we start with Bonatti, the first thing he'll say, and so said, blah, 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 right? So we've already seen all of this stuff. Injuries to the unfortunate, shedding of blood, thieves and tavern keepers, proud, liars, perjurers, oppression through power by killing those, rage, cutters of roads, rushing, the leaders of an army, shamelessness and fickle, almost the exact same thing that we just saw with Alcabisi. Now, as we come into the 17th century with Lily, it gets a little bit, things are looking a little different. In feats of war and courage, invincible, scorning any should exceed him, subject to no reason, bold, right? Subject to no reason, right? So once again, this action without thinking. Bold, confident, immovable, contentious, challenging all honor to themselves, valiant lovers of war, things. So, right, so no, absolutely no surprises. Lack of modesty, prattler without modesty or honesty, lover of slaughter, murder, thief, promoter of sedition, phrase, commotions, highway thief, right? So all of that stuff, we're seeing all the same thing. Perjured, obscene, rash, inhumane, neither fearing God or caring for man. They receive a dissent against religion. Unthankful, treacherous, oppressors, ravenous, cheaters, furious, and violent. Lawlessness and violence. And Ad-Dawla, this is from Bonatti, but as you can see, the very first thing he says is, Ad-Dawla said, Mars gives a man to have a curved body and thick, and he will make a schismatic man. There's the secession. That is a weed and sowing discord among them. There's the discord. In his face, the color red mixed with black, right? Because red is the Mars color, as if it would be said he has a brown color like those who go into the sun and heat, so that he is neither black nor is truly red, but he has a horrible color and sometimes has freckles on his face, or maybe our gingers are Mars, and sometimes sparse hairs in his beard, as though he looked as though like those castrated. Oh, right, because eunuchs usually couldn't grow hair very well. Eunuchs were usually castrated before they hit puberty, and so the puberty then, when they went through puberty, it would usually not completely take. And Mashallah said, so we're looking now at the body specifically. A man red in the face, so there's the red thing, red hair in the head, round face, easily disrespecting men, so here's manner, having orange eyes, a horrible look, bold, having a sign or mark on his foot. That's interesting. And Dorothea said, having a sharp look, and that's repeated in Bonatti later. Now, when we come to Lily, and now remember that Lily, now all of these people were working astrologers, especially Bonatti and Lily, but Lily was looking at charts almost every day. And Lily was looking at horary charts where he was almost always noticing how the ascendant and the ruler of the ascendant showed the physicality of the body. He would say things like, a young man came to me, and sure enough, Leo rises, and he had a fine head of hair, and blah blah blah. He would almost always make a comment about how the person resembled the sign on the ascendant and the ruler of the ascendant. So Lily would also be a very good person to be using. Middle stature, body strong, bones big, rather lean than fat, complexion of a brown ruddy color, there that is again, or of a high color. Their visage round, so once again, this round face thing. So the other round face is the moon. Their hair red or sandy flaxen, and many times crisping or curling. Sharp hazel eyes, so sharp eyes, piercing eyes, bold countenance, and active and fearless. Okay, so pretty much all of them are saying the same thing. We come now to the professions. And as we were talking about with Alcibiades, every fiery mastery, what comes to be through iron, like the beating of swords with hammers. And you can see he says, so if Mars is with Saturn, he's going to beat iron. If he's with Jupiter, he's going to beat copper. If he's with the sun, he's going to beat gold. If he's with Venus, he's going to make ornaments. If Mercury, then he's going to beat out needles, because Mercury needles, you would make thread, and you would do sewing and all those types of things, which also is under Mercury. And if the moon is complected to him, it signifies the beating out of dishes and scales. Dishes, cooking. Mars and moon can represent cooking. I have moon in Aries. I'm a fantastic cook. I have Sag rising. I've got quite a bit of fire in the chart, and I'm really into, and I really love cooking. Let's see, Mars professions with Alcibiades. So this is the second part of Alcibiades talking. And if he alone took up the significations, he even signifies the work of medicine. When if no planet is complected to him, which if no planet is complected to him, it signifies the withdrawing of blood, right? Anything where we're bloodletting. Martial moon too, and I'm a good cook. Okay, exactly. Because right, the moon wants comfort, and the moon takes comfort in heat if it's in a fire sign. So it takes comfort in things that are heating. So I get a lot of comfort out of cooking. It's very meditative for me. It's not like I have other friends who are like, oh, I hate cooking. It's, I just feel like I do all this work and then then it's all gone. And it's like, for me, it's like, oh no, all that work is this really meditative, relaxing thing. So if no planet is complected to him, signifies the withdrawing of blood. There's the bloodletting or bloodshed and the opening of wounds. And what is like these? And if Saturn is complected to him, it signifies the work of curing wounds, right? So Jupiter, the work of natures. Sun, it signifies preparation of eyes, because remember, Sun is the sight and the cure of the eyes. Venus is complected, it signifies working of ornamentation. We already talked about, like, oh, cutting hair and beard. So this is beautician stuff. And the cutting of nails. So manicure, mani, pedi, and beautician, right? Or really barber and mani, pedi. Beautician is a little bit different, even though it does involve cutting. And if Mercury is complected to him, it signifies the cutting of veins. And if Moon is complected, the pulling of teeth and the cleaning of ears. So dentists in connection with the Moon and Mars. and the cleaning of ears. I think that's interesting.
What does
And
the Mercury one mean? Cutting a vein.
veins. Oh, Mercury rules the nervous system and the veins.
I know, but what kind of job would that be short of like assassin?
Oh, I was thinking more like it might be like a surgeon of some sort.
Ah, okay, got it, got it. Thank you.
Mercury was more like surgical cutting of. Also, remember that one of the ways that there were two ways that things that they would do. They would often use leeches, if you remember. So this is the period where leeching was really huge, where bloodletting was basically, they believed that getting rid of blood would help you to kind of balance your humors. And so that's a cutting of a vein. And then also the leeches would, you put the, stitching wounds. Yes, thank you, Olivia. But Mars is cutting. Well, Mars is cutting and stitch, but you know what you have to do in order to stitch, right? You have to stick it, you have to, push the needle through, so you have to puncture. And so that's certainly a Mars thing too. So I think that might be the connection they made. So bloodletting and leeching and bloodletting is what I think. Let's see. So exercise by iron and fire, as a striking iron with hammers or an anvil. By other means, practice work of craftsmen. So it looks like the work of craftsmen falls under Mars. Bakers, furnace tenders, so pizza oven, so any kind of cooks or bakers. Butchers, right? Because you're cutting all the time. Barbers and the like. So it gives us kind of an idea now. It's like when we see a butcher, we know that we're in the element of Mars. We see we're in a kitchen, we're in an industrial kitchen, we're in the element of Mars, even though we're dealing with food service, which is the moon, which is why this moon Mars thing. And he said, then you're beating out dishes, right? And I guess there's more than one way to beat out. You can beat out by pounding on something, but you can beat out by very quickly bringing things out, right? And we saw that Mars is connected to abruptness and quickness as well. So soul significator, he signifies the work of medicine, both surgery and the other side of medicine, which if none of the planets is complected with him, he signifies the work of medicine, which is by the opening of veins, like phlebotomy, and the opening of abscesses, like you were just talking about with the lancing of a boil, and the draining of wounds, right, which is also lancing of a boil, and the like. So, and now we're on to Lily. So obviously a tyrannous ruler, a tyrant is Mars, right, because he's ruling by oppression and tyranny and violence and coercion. Usurpers, new conquerors, right, so all of that definitely falls under Mars. Generals of armies, makes perfect sense. Colonels, captains, any soldiers, so military, having command in armies. So now we're coming closer into what we tend to think of when we think of Mars, as Mars professions. All manner of soldiers, physicians, apothecaries, chirurgeons, a chirurgeon is a surgeon, alchemists, right? Remember, alchemy is the precursor to chemistry. Mars represents chemistry, because you often are boiling things, heating things up in order to make things happen. Gunners, right? Guns are weapons. So gunners, butchers use knives. Marshals have guns. Sergeants, bailiffs, hangmen execute people. Thieves, kill people. Smiths use fire and beat things and create weapons. Bakers, armorers create armor for war. Watchmakers, I don't know why watchmakers. Botchers, I don't know what a botcher is. Tailors use scissors. Cutlers of swords and knives, barbers, dyers. Now, dyers usually falls under Saturn because of the bad smell. Cooks, carpenters, gamesters, bear wards, tanners. Like tanners and dyers usually fall under Saturn because a tanning facility usually smells really bad, and it was considered one of the lowest class kind of jobs that you can have. And so tanners and dyers, I would give to Saturn, but you can see he's given it to Lily has given it to Mars, and couriers. Moving on to the body parts. So this is Valence. So we're back to the 2nd century. The head, which of course that represents Mars as ruler of Aries. The seat, the genitals of the internal parts, it rules the blood, the sperm ducts. Okay, so there's the testicles, the bile, the elimination of excrement, the parts in the rear, the back and the underside. So we can see on some level how he's actually connected the body parts to the two signs. Aries rules the head, the seat, the genitals, the elimination of excrement, parts in the rears, that's all Scorpio. So we can see that that really is what Valens is doing, is he's basically using the body parts based on the parts of the body that Aries and Scorpio rules. But now when we get to Al-Kabizi, now we start to see gallbladder, the kidneys and the veins, and the kidneys and veins and the flowing out of the sperm and the back. And of course, the reproductive organs are Venus, but the flow of sperm, which of course is the male generative substance, is represented by Mars, and the back, which I find interesting. So quite a few of the things that we look at for Libra representing the kidneys and the back, actually Mars is the representative of planetarily. So Abu Ali al-Khayyat and Abu Bakr said, wherefore Mars has of the parts of the body gallbladder, kidneys, veins. So I said veins for Mercury, but I'm sorry, it's veins for Mars. So maybe what we're talking about when it's Mars and Mercury is Mercury having the skill to cut the Mars vein. I don't know, but that's a very interesting thing. Spermatic ducts and the back. We'll say same thing with spermatic ducts and the back. So this might be before they really realize exactly what the testicles were for. And of colors, he has redness, and of flavors, the bitter. So knowing that Abu Mashar and Al-Kabizi were writing around the 9th century, 8th, 9th century, 9th, 10th century, and Bonatti is writing in the 13th century. So we've got about 400 years, and we've got 400 years of continuity between these two pieces of information. Now we come into the 17th century. We go another 300 years forward, and or 400 years forward, and we see the left ear, gall, so gall could be gallbladder, the reins, which of course is the groin area, the veins, so we still have the veins, we still have the testicles, the right nostril, so we haven't seen that, so left ear and right nostril, and the plane of Mars in the hand, so that's interesting. And then Lily, I think, is next. Oh no, then we come into infirmities. Okay, so I think this is it. Wait, I just wanted to, oh wait, what is that? Naughty. Okay. Okay. Wait. So okay, we just finished that. Okay. So hot fevers, right? Hot and dry. Think about, what do they say? Feed a fever, start a cold. One of the main things they try to get you to do when you have a hot fever is drink lots of fluid, right? Because fevers can dry you out. You can get dehydrated. So there's the hot, dry element of a fever, and maniacal behavior from the blood, and bloody pustules and anthrax, right? So it seems like Mars represents any kind of pustule, any kind of eruption, any kind of eruption of the skin, and especially if it's kind of red or irritated. So any kind of red kind of irritation, itching, actually maybe itching was Saturn, but red irritation we definitely have with that. The eating of flesh with rotting, so leprosy I guess could be involved with that, and a pain in half the head. And the sacred fire and fear and horrible thoughts which make a man uneasy and provoke and impede. So remember we were talking about the kind of mind for a person, and so this is uneasy thinking. So a Mars kind of thought process, or Mars infirmity to the mind, makes one uneasy. It can provoke and impede them. And render them useless. And whatever there was with an inflammation of heat, inflammation, right? There's the word flame inside inflammation, and Mars is hot. So any kind of inflammation is connected to Mars. I think we also saw inflammation with the sun. Now here we go with Bonatti, hot fevers, arise from choler, right? And not inflamed. Isn't that interesting? And without cause and true, and even not true madness. And bloody pustules, right? We talked about that. Impetigo, white morphia, we haven't talked about what those are, and unusual rednesses, which come right, we were just talking about any kind of irritation or redness, which comes to be in the body apart from nature, with stinging or roughness and a stink, and itching. Oh, there, so that should be itching. And lentigos and illnesses eating the flesh of the body. So once again, illnesses. So anything that is self-devouring. And it signifies migraine. So that's what they were talking about with the pain in the head. So migraine, right? Because Aries rules the head, Mars rules the head, and erysipelas, I don't know what that is, and the like. And it even signifies that the native will eat rotten meats and not well cooked. and it signifies quaking fear, right? The quaking fear is the opposite of courage, and horrible thoughts disturbing men, which move and impede and render them useless. Notice that he's saying almost the exact same as Alcabisi. I like the reason even though Bonatti usually says the same thing, he almost always gives a little bit more information or he clarifies. And I think he did that here. Signifies quaking fear and horrible thoughts that disturb men and which move and impede and render them useless. Remember, Mars is action, Mars is praxis. And so whatever impedes our ability impedes our praxis is negative Mars, or if our praxis is impeded, the Mars is negative. And he signifies whatever was with the inflammation of heat. So there is the inflammation of heat. So hot fever is without inflammation, but inflammation of heat and of qualities of the mind, he signifies agitation and confusion. Erysipelas is an infection of the upper layers of the skin, which more than likely creates bumps of some sort, or might create some kind of eruption. Thank you. Okay, so here's Saunders. Raised edges. Okay, excellent. Here's Saunders, and the reason I use Saunders is because Kid Cubby on the Horary subreddit says that Saunders is one of the best to look at for medical astrology and things in relation to it. So instead of
they know Horary.
Yeah. So okay, so that's the reason I'm using him. But I mean, I would usually use Lily, but when he said that, I was like, oh, okay, well, let's look into that. So let's see. So collar, hot apostemations, overflowings of the gall, so gallbladder, jaundices, madness, frenzy. So madness. Frenzy, so madness, that's another thing. So I think frenzy more than I think it's madness as in frenzy. I was talking to somebody on they were talking about how am I seen, and it was a mutual reception between the sun and Mars. The sun was in Aries and Mars was in Leo. And I said, and one of the things I know about Mars and Leo, or that I've called Mars and Leo, is Mars and Leo rages. And so I said, you might be seen as a rager. And I said, but separate the concept of rage from the concept of rage from anger, because there's a raging party, right? You can be a raging partier. You can be a raging maniac. You can be I went to this raging rave. When things are raging, they're white hot. They're at this kind of white hot state. And so things in Leo can have a tendency to be ragers. They can go white hot. And so I think this is the kind of madness that Mars can bring, is this white hot frenzy of madness. Gouts, hot gouts, fistulae, carbuncles, fluxes of blood, breaking of veins, augs, burnings, vomiting of blood, acute diseases being more, if he's the morbificant planet, the disease shall proceed as choler, as burning fevers, tertian augs, choleric ejections upward and downward, so jaundices, inflammations, ejection, so vomiting and that kind of thing is involved with Mars. So any kind of eruption, something coming from the inside to the outside, often is connected to Mars. Thirst, anger, thirst, right? The dehydration of thirst. Mars is dry. Anger, redness of the face, pestilent burning fevers. Any kind of thing that you get, things like the bubonic plague, scarlet fever, that's Mars. That's as Mars as it gets. And even think about the things, the little eruptions of scars or smallpox, scarlet fever. Those are all measles. Those are all Mars related things. Measles, what's the other one? Chicken pox. Oh wait, didn't we see something other with the chicken pox? Or the smallpox, but definitely I would think it would be Mars. And then last, but I did include Lily. Gall, left ear, tertian fevers, pestilent burning fevers. Let's see, ringworm, that's something. Blisters, that makes sense. Plague sores and plague, sudden distempers in the head, yellow jaundice, bloody flux, fistulas, all wounds and diseases in men's genitals. The stone, both in the range. So the stones would be gallstones and gallstones. And bladders, scars or smallpox in the face, all hurts by iron, the shingles, such other diseases arise by abundance of too much choler, anger, or passion. Colors and flavors. So here's a little chart that shows what all of the different flavors of the planets are. Saturn has the bitter, Jupiter has the sweet, Mars has the sharp. So it can be bitter and caustic. Now, I always thought Mars had the spicy, but it looks like it's the sun that has the spicy. And the interesting thing is about me is that I love spicy food. I adore it. I lived in Thailand for 8 years, adore spicy food. I love it. And I always thought it was because of Mars, but I also have Sun in the first house. So I think that's kind of interesting. So mixture of sour and sweet, aromatic flavors for the spicy for Sun, delectable for Venus, and also unctuous. Oh, there it is, unctuous. Mixed for Mercury, obviously, right? He rules mixtures. Salty is another one. That's for the Moon, the salty flavor, but the watery or the salty. And so he delights in the red color or the yellow fiery and shining like saffron, and in those flavors which are bitter, sharp, and burn the tongue of humors and colors. So something that burns the tongue is like a chili, right? That would burn your tongue. So maybe that is, it's the hot, but not the spicy. Things can be spicy without being, they can be spicy without being hot. And so think of a lot of Indian dishes or Indian/Pakistani dishes that are think of something like a biryani, right? Which is quite spicy, or not a karma, but even like a butter chicken or something like that. It's quite spicy, but it's not hot, right? And so I think that's the difference. Let's see. So burn the tongue of humor's collar. And then we come. So one of the pages was missing. So we can notice that ginger is one of the plants. Also notice that herbs that come near to redness, whose leaves are pointed and sharp, whose taste is caustic and burning, love to grow on dry places, are corrosive and penetrating the flesh. So something like poison oak would be Mars, right? But we can see onion and garlic because they have kind of sharp flavors, pepper, ginger. Interesting that leeks. I wonder if that's because of where they grow. Nettles, turmeric. Is turmeric in there? Tamarind.
Well, I'm just saying, I think it is, because if you use too much, it gets very bitter.
Oh, does it? Okay. I see the
Yeah.
tamarind.
I know from experience. I used an extra tablespoon in a dish because I thought I could get away with it today. It got really bitter.
Interesting. So it's so fascinating, the difference between kind of Vedic and Western. Like it's when we get to these things that they start switching who they think the planet. Like turmeric is a Jupiter planet, if I'm not mistaken.
It is, I feel like, in terms of effect though, because it's anti-inflammatory.
Yes, exactly. So too much, but if too and actually, like you said, if you use the right amount, it's not bitter. It's actually kind of it's actually kind of a
no. That was me going off book a little bit. Like
yeah, but the tamarind makes a little more sense, and obviously the hemlock does. And look at this. Does anybody know what a cantharide is?
No, but what's funny? I associate hemlock with Saturn because it kills you, but it does so by slowing down your systems, I think.
Maybe it has a bitter flavor.
Yeah.
Maybe it has. Maybe they're going by the flavor.
Yeah.
And it might also have something to do with what it looks like, right? So red, come near to a redness whose leaves are pointed and sharp. It might have thorns or pricks on it, right? Trees which
looks a lot like a fennel. I think.
Oh, so kind of green, just kind of light green, like
a green kind of stalk kind of looking thing.
Interesting.
I mean, I don't know. I haven't really researched hemlock.
Interesting. Well, that'd be something to look at. But cantharides are also known as Spanish fly. You ever heard of Spanish fly?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so Spanish
the
fly.
Supposed aphrodisiac.
Absolutely. So cantharides, and remember how they talk about how Mars is fornication and lawless sexuality and lust. So I thought that was interesting.
What about roses then?
Roses have a good smell. That's a really good question. So because they're beautiful and have a good smell, belong to Venus. But I think that roses are like Venus and Aries or Mars and Taurus. Because it's got the thorns, but it's also got this beautiful, wonderful smelling thing at the end.
Mm.
So that's a good question. Notice the planets that are, or the beasts that are represented: the panther, the tiger, the vulture, the fox. All of those. So I would imagine, like, wouldn't a hawk or something like that, like some of these birds of prey, but it doesn't look like it. Those are more like, oh, birds, the hawk, huh? I'm like, wouldn't the hawk be in there? Sure enough. So ravenous and bold, any kind of ravenous. So the hyena probably, the badger, the wolverine. Those would all be Mars animals. The castor, the horse. Look at how the horses. I thought we saw horses under sun last time. Ostrich, goat, the wolf.
Yeah.
Didn't we?
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but my other teacher, he'd noted down for me why roses are ruled by a few things. He says it's also Mars because it has thorns.
Right. That's why I was thinking it would be Mars.
Yeah, totally right.
It'd be Mars, Venus, because it has thorns as well.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I remember when I first learned about the three qualities of soul. You know, the vegetative, the sensitive, and the intellective. And the first example that I used, I remember when I was starting to write about it, was a rose, and how, based on the vegetative aspect, this rose would, you know, how would we describe the rose on the vegetative? And it's beautiful and it smells good, but it has thorns. So it must be a Venus-Mars thing, or it must be a Venus in a Mars sign thing, or a Mars in a Venus sign thing. And so I was just kind of talking about that in that particular way. So Venus and Mars, definitely. And also think about how roses, especially red roses, represent love and what can happen in love. And what do they say? All is fair in love and what? War, right? All is fair in love and war. And red roses, Venus and Scorpio would fit too. But I'm thinking more Aries, because Aries is the masculine aspect of Mars that would be dangerous. That would be more kind of overtly dangerous. I mean, and maybe it could be Scorpio, because like when you're looking at the roses, unless you know that a rose has a thorn, you wouldn't know it. You pick it and you're like, oh, this is beautiful. And you're like, oh shit, there's a thorn. But knowing that roses have thorns, excuse me, knowing that roses have thorns and have something that can hurt, it feels more, something sharp, it feels more like Aries, but maybe. So so for fish, the pike, the shark, of course, the barbel, the forkfish, all stinking worms. So I guess eels might fall under that. And then the scorpion, because he can sting. And of course, Mars was Scorpio. And so hawk, vulture, the kite or glebe, the raven, the cormorant, the owl. Some say the eagle, but I think we gave the eagle to Jupiter. And of course, next when we get to Jupiter, we're going to do Jupiter next month. So when we get to Jupiter, we'll probably see him there. The crow. Now it's interesting, in Vedic astrology, or in India, Saturn's Vihana or vehicle is a crow, and the pie. So crows are connected to Saturn in Vedic
Because of
astrology.
color?
Yes, because of the black color. And then a region, I mean, there are other black birds, but Saturn's Vahana is a crow. Mars, places and countries. Okay, so he has Jerusalem and the land of the Romans up to the west. So isn't that interesting? He has the Holy Land, where many of the pilgrimages are. So he's the ruler of pilgrimage, and then he's given Jerusalem. And then that's Bonatti, but now these are by Lily. He's given Sarmatia, which is where that is, Lombardy, but so that's in northern Italy. Batavia, Ferrari, which is in northern Italy, Gothland, and the third climate. I'm not really sure. The third climate. I forget where that is. And then his places are smiths, shops, furnaces, slaughterhouses, places where bricks or charcoals are burned or have been burned, chimneys, forges, and forges. And then Mars governs Tuesday.
Mm-hmm.
So we've gotten kind of an idea of who Mars is. I thought we would now look at a few different charts and see the Mars effect to the extent to which Mars is important. And as you can see in the list here, I've got Muhammad Ali, Joe Louis, who was another, who was the most famous boxer before Muhammad Ali, Bruce Lee, George Washington, General George Washington, General George Patton, Oliver North, who was involved in the Iran-Contra thing in the 80s, but he was a military, he was a Marine. And then I've got the charts of Aurangzeb, who was one of the Mughal, who was the last important Mughal emperor, and his arch enemy, Shivaji the Great. And so let's start with Muhammad Ali. You see, I have Alfred Dreyfus there. Alfred Dreyfus was the main victim of this thing called the Dreyfus Affair in France in the 1890s. He was a Jewish officer in the army, and he was slandered, and he was accused of something that he didn't do, and he was slandered, and his name was ruined, etc. But I thought we can come to that another time. Now, Layla, I remember you mentioning the fact that in a lot of these fighters' charts, we're going to see Mars in detriment. We're going to see Mars in Venus signs.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that they talk about with planets in detriment is that there tends to be an overcompensation with the person, that the person has a tendency to want to overcompensate in order to get, Now, here's the other thing about it, is that most people who fight for a living are nonviolent by practice.
Yeah. Well, plus they turn the fighting into an art form. It's not just straight up bludgeoning. Like there's some artistry there, which I think would explain some of the Venusian aspects.
Well, there's skill, there's artistry and skill. Where there's skill, I mean, here's the thing. Skill at its highest level becomes art, right? So often you'll see somebody talk about somebody who's really good and they'll say, oh, that guy is, or that woman is an artist. They're an artist. That person is an artist. And it's really because they've taken their level of skill to a place that other people can't take it. And it becomes art. And so we could certainly say, I mean, think about what Muhammad Ali used to say all the time, what float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. Those were the things that he would always say. And essentially, he went through the string. At one point, Muhammad Ali was maybe the most famous person in the world. He was one of the most famous people in the world, and famous for being a fighter, but famous for also being blacklisted for a few years because he refused to fight in the Vietnam War. So when we're looking at this chart, does this look like the chart of a fighter per se, or of somebody violent? No, in my opinion. This doesn't look like the chart of somebody violent. Now, interestingly, if we were looking at the Vedic chart, everything moves back and now Mars is in Aries. And now the moon, Mercury, Venus is all in Capricorn, which is Mars's exaltation.
Mars is kind of like getting close to the MC. That's kind of interesting because it is what he did for a living, what he was known for.
It is, even though actually it's right. He was, so that is interesting that he's known for that. So the funny thing for me is looking at this chart and looking at how both the part of fortune and the part of and the ascendant are both Leo. So they both point to the sun, don't they?
Yeah.
Sun.
In the 6th, the house
What
of joy of Mars.
What sun? What sign?
What sign? Capricorn.
What's important about Capricorn and Mars?
It's a sign of exaltation.
Right. So we've got the chart ruler disposited by the Mars here, by the Saturn and the Mars. Is there a connection? I'm not looking at the chart at the second. I'm trying to get something. Is there a connection between Mars and Saturn?
They're in the same sign. They're co-present.
They're co-present in the same sign. Okay, that's pretty important. Okay, so they're both in the same sign, which is the sign of the 10th house, right? So if we were looking at this whole sign perspective, then we would have both Mars and Saturn in the 10th house, correct?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. By plus, or you're using Alcabitius, but like Mars is in the 9th.
But we look at this from a whole sign perspective, then all of a sudden we've got Mars Saturn in the 10th, and Mars
Yeah.
Saturn are both ruling the sun.
Yeah.
So
Both
there
of
we have,
them.
and Mars Saturn are both ruling the Aquarius because Mars is in the same sign with Saturn, or rather, Saturn is ruling all this stuff in Aquarius too. Right?
Which is
the
like
Mar-
all of his other planets. Almost
Right.
all.
So looking at the 27th degree of Capricorn, the planets that are important are, it's not, is it daytime or nighttime? It's nighttime. Okay, so the planets that are that have dignity are Saturn, Mars, the Moon, Mars, and the Sun. So Mars has 6 points. Saturn has 5. The Sun has 1 point. So Mars is actually the almutin of the Sun. Right? Remember we were talking last week. Oh, you weren't with us last week, but last week we were looking at creating compound almutins. We were looking at something called the muktaz. Oh wait, you were there when we talked about muktaz, weren't we? Because I thought you gave us an
Yeah,
example.
or I mean, at least kind of understand the concept of an Almutin. You're just kind of looking at the essential dignity and like comparing it, right? Basically, of this, yeah.
Yeah, the score. What we're doing is
The
we're looking,
score, yeah, like you were saying, 20, whatever,
right?
whatever
so
it
who
was,
has-
27 degrees of Capricorn. What are the essential, like, what planet has the most essential dignity?
Exactly. What planet has the highest score? It has the most.
Which I assume something with Saturn, but no, no, maybe it's actually Mars. You said exaltation.
Mars, that's what I'm saying. So the almutin, which means victor or winner, is Mars. So Saturn is the domicile ruler of this degree of Capricorn, but Mars is the actual almutin. So that's interesting too, because now that further brings us back to Mars, right? We know that the Saturn and the Mars would be co-present in the 10th. What about the connection between, look at the connection between Venus and Saturn. And there's a mutual reception between the Venus and the Saturn. Now, oh, even more important in my opinion, the 7th house is the house of what? Aside from marriage, it's known as the house of what?
Like partnerships
And what else?
or
Open
sometimes
enemies.
battles.
Say it again, Olivia. Battles, yes. War.
Open enemies.
Open enemies. Thank you. It's the house of open enemies. When you're a boxer, what do? You fight against your open enemy. You fight against your it's also competitors, right? The 7th house, when person is asking about a job, if the 7th house is stronger than the 1st house, your competitor has a better chance than you do.
Yeah.
Right?
Or any sort of battle, legal battle.
Exactly, in battle, exactly. So we can, and we also know that the second triplicity ruler of the 7th house represents contention. So it's nighttime, so who's the first triplicity ruler? The first triplicity is Mercury, so that would represent the marriages. The second triplicity represents the contentions, that is, guess who? Saturn. So now we've got the planet that represents contentions in the 10th house. Right? So last week when we were talking about what we're looking at when we look at anything, that we look at the house cusp, we look at the planet ruling the house, we look at the planet in the house, we look at the part representing the area of life that the house is talking about, we look at the ruler of that, we look at the triplicity ruler the triplicity ruler that represents the thing that we're talking about as well, right? And then the universal ruler, the universal significator.
Wait, so this is a night chart, right? Because the sun's below the horizon.
Right, this is
Okay.
a night, which means that Mercury becomes the first triplicity ruler of air, and Saturn becomes the second, which brings us to him for contentions. And so that makes perfect sense. And so a fight is a contention. And then the fact that the Venus is in the sign of Saturn, who is representing not just specifically marriage, but also contention, she's also in that sign. And there's that mutual reception. So the 7th house is going to be connected to the 1st house, and it's connected by square, or rather connected to the 10th house, and it's connected by square. So what do we just say? Squares are aspects of challenge and stress. And they even say that the square has the nature of two people vying for the same kingdom. Sounds like a fight for the title, right? And note also, Venus is the ruler of Mars.
Yeah.
So
and ninth house. Yeah.
And so the Venus Saturn, this Venus Saturn is the ruler of Mars. Right. So once again, whenever a planet is connected to another planet, it ceases to just kind of be its own thing. This Venus is, even though they're separating, this Venus is a Venus-Saturn square. And so it's this Venus-Saturn square that's representing, that is ruling the sun, and it's this Venus-Saturn square that's representing the Mars and the sun, right? Saturn as domicile ruler of the sun gives us the Venus-Saturn square. Venus as domicile ruler of Taurus gives us the Venus-Saturn square. So the 10th house, 7th house square. And knowing that Saturn is the triplicity ruler that represents contentions. Now we could also look at, let's see if there's a contentions, contentions part. I'm pretty sure there is.
There's gotta be. One thing I noticed just off the cusp is that ninth house is he has a Mars ruled ninth house cusp, at least in Placidus. I'm sorry, I can't see your chart very well, but he converted, he changed whatever religion he had, gave it up for another one.
He sure did. His name was Cassius Clay Jr. His name was Cassius Clay Jr. He had his father's name. He became a Muslim. He was one of the first. He met Elijah Muhammad when Elijah Muhammad was creating the Muslim thing, Elijah Muhammad had created it years before. But he becomes Muhammad Ali. You're absolutely right. So this Mars, remember how we talked about religious descent?
Yeah.
And Mars with the ninth house can represent descent from the religion. So in this case, there's actually even a change of religion. So if I remember, first triplicity ruler was the ruler of long distance travel and pilgrimage. The second triplicity ruler was the ruler of faith, religion and faith. So who would the second triplicity ruler be? It would be the sun. So this sun in the sixth, and look, it's an immovable sign. I was looking for something being an immovable sign. We've got a movable sign on the ninth cusp, and then the sun itself, and the sun is religion, and the sun itself is an immovable sign. And Capricorn, I think Islam is one of the Saturn. Islam is one of the Saturn, because it's one of the Abrahamic. The Abrahamic religions are Saturnine religions. So that he might make a change to a Saturnian religion.
What do you mean by movable sign?
Oh, another word for cardinal is movable.
Cardinal. Sorry, I thought you were saying mutable. I was like, what is he talking about?
Movable.
Movable. Okay.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, movable, not mutable. Movable.
Cardinal. Okay, that makes more sense.
Movable. So
and it kind of also makes sense too that the Abrahamic religions are ruled by Saturn, but I've never heard that. It's interesting.
Because they're patriarchal. When we come to Saturn, we'll see that. But yeah, so absolutely, I think this chart definitely gives us a good view into, it gives us an interesting view into the Mars. Now this is a B rating chart. I only want to use double A's or A's. Okay, here is Bruce Lee. Now this is much more, this one is much more specific, isn't it? Because Sun is on the ascendant. Now that's interesting. The last chart we had Leo rising. Now Sun is on the ascendant. Now one of the things that you need to be a fighter is what? What do you need
Energy.
to be yes, you need vitality and the ability to heal quickly. And that's the Sun. So note how the Sun is here on the ascendant for Bruce Lee, even though he died early. and then note that Leo was rising for Muhammad Ali. I just want to look at Joe Louis for a second to see if there's anything with the sun connected to it. No, but okay, good. But once again, this is a B chart. Okay, this chart, in my opinion, is really obvious. Part of fortune is in Scorpio. Mars is there. The moon is there. Mercury, Venus is there.
Yeah.
Right.
He's helped in this case, right? I mean, it's not technically besiegement by benefics because it's not Jupiter, but Venus
Mercury,
and the moon.
Well, the moon
in a Mars sign, they're helpful, right?
Well, okay, so I wouldn't call the moon necessarily benefic in this because she's
no, yeah.
However,
yeah.
You're right. She's in his sign. She's with him in his sign. So in other words, what I would think about this generally is that Mars is calling the shots, period.
Yeah, and that Mars seems like he has a lot of sort of generals at his disposal.
Exactly, he does. And notice how the Jupiter Saturn is ruled by Venus, who is in Scorpio with Mars. She's applying to Mars.
Yeah,
that's our closest application is the Venus to Mars. And then also notice how the sun is ruled by Jupiter, who's ruled by Venus, who's with Mars. So everything goes back to Mars in this chart. And one of the things that Bruce Lee was known for was stealth, was quiet stealth, was not knowing where things were coming from. You not knowing how he got to where he got to, and you not knowing where he was just here and now he's over here. So he had this thing with kind of being able to be like ninja-like invisible, right? So the silence of the Scorpio here. So this looks like, unlike the other chart, where that just looked like it was the chart of somebody doing it for a living. Right, Muhammad Ali wasn't a warrior. He was a poet. Remember, I mean, I don't know if you know, Muhammad Ali is one of the most interesting, famous people of the 20th century. Not highly educated, but super fucking intelligent. And one of the things that he did all the time, Mars and Taurus, was he made poems. He would make impromptu poems, and he was a personality, and there's that Leo rising. He wasn't just a boxer. I mean, he did boxing for work, but as he became known, especially, I was a little kid when Muhammad Ali was world famous, and like when he did the first, I was born when he had his first major championship. I was 8 years old when he did the Rumble in the Jungle. And I remember seeing him on television all the time. And to be honest with you, I never saw him fight. I never saw Muhammad Ali fight. What I saw Muhammad Ali do was repartee, jokes, poems, bon vivant, just being a personality. But this person, Bruce Lee, is born for combat. So this is like a Shaolin monks chart, in my opinion, right? So Muhammad Ali is, just this kind of little grandstander guy who turns out to have this talent at fighting. But this person, this is what their life is about, right? So remember, we were trying to figure that out when we were looking at the Muhammad Ali chart. It's like, when you look at this, does this look like a fighter's chart? This one does.
The second chart too, where there's a grand trine.
Oh,
the second chart, Muhammad Ali had one too, with the sun. Oh, I guess Pluto you don't really like. Oh, and also K2. I just noticed the pattern, the big triangle in both of them. And the outer planets are in detriment in both charts, which I think is kind of interesting.
I'd use the Neptune Sun. I'd use the Sun, Neptune, Uranus for Muhammad, or the Sun, Saturn, the Sun, Neptune, Uranus for the Grand Trine. For Bruce Lee, I would probably not.
No, because it's a point. No, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, I would. Wait, where's the other? You said K2 is involved in it? Oh, you're saying, oh, I see what you're looking at. Oh, you're right. K2 isn't, but K, yeah, not really. So
Yeah,
moon,
no, I get what you're.
yeah, moon and Mercury, I would give. Yeah, so there's a moon Mercury trine. So, oh, that's Joe Louis. Okay, oh, that's, oh, I see. So that's Joe Louis. Let's see if we can find Bruce Lee. Is there a trine in that one? Oh, I see. Yeah, sure enough. No, but with
Yeah.
but with K2, I see. Yeah, sure enough.
Exactly.
Isn't that interesting though? Isn't that interesting though? So still a kind of grand trinity or trinity. And
There's like a
close.
flow of energy.
And note once again, what do we call Pluto? He's the god of the underworld, right? And so we've got
Kind of tightly squaring Mars too, dude. Did you catch that?
Oh, indeed. Sure enough. Yeah, so this, like I said, this life is different. This is a life that really is around the principles of Mars. This is a life organized around the tenets of Mars. Right? Everything is working for Mars in this chart. Everything. And this person could also make an art. This is an artist. This is a person who's martial artist. But this is a
Literal.
This is a person who makes art out of the martial, because Mars is with Venus and the moon, right? So it's affecting the mind. It's all Mars is on the mind, and the Mars Venus. This person is probably very sexual too, but also refining, because Venus is the process of making things more beautiful, making things more attractive, making things more harmonious. This person would probably be very experimental and like I said, into developing their skill into an art. And look,
do we know
Mercury,
if he was very sexual?
say that
Because
again.
I see it. Do you know if he was very sexual? Because I see it too.
Yeah, from what I understand, he was. I mean, I don't know if there was a sexual scandal, but from what I remember, he was married to, he had just gotten with this one white woman, I think, prior to his death. Let's see what we can see about here. But I mean, he was gorgeous.
Yeah. Look at the opposition too, though. Jupiter and Taurus in the 5th.
So he might have been Saturn too. So he might have been able to kind of keep it under wraps there. Let's see. Personal life, names, family, friends. Personal life.
Back then, I guess you weren't really supposed to get with white women.
Yeah, I mean, he's and also like his is one of the first like interracial Asian white kind of romance things that are in his movies. One of the first times that you see that is with him. And also remember his son Brandon, who also died really young, is half white. He wrote poetry. Aside from martial arts and philosophy, which focus on the physical aspect and self-consciousness for truth and principles, Lee also wrote poetry that reflected his emotion. While best known as a martial artist, Lee also studied drama and Asian and Western philosophy, starting while a student at the University of Washington. There's Venus. He was well-read and had an extensive library dominated by martial arts subjects and philosophical texts. There's the Mercury and the Venus and the Moon with it. His own books on martial arts, he wrote books, and fighting philosophy are known for their philosophical assertions both inside and outside of martial arts circles. So remember how I was saying this is someone, that's living by the tenets of Mars, this whole kind of Mars thing. Influences include Taoism, Buddhism, etc. So absolutely, it looks like this person represented that. Let's see, is kind of what we were saying. It doesn't look like, let's see, it doesn't look like it says anything about finding marriage or anything like that. It doesn't say, studied martial, wow, Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate, before she was killed, studied with him. But it doesn't focus very much on his sex life. I would know Buddhism is more probably Mercury, because in Vedic astrology, Buddha is the avatar for Mercury. I'm sorry, Buddha is the avatar for Vishnu. It's the Mercury avatar for Vishnu. That's what I'm trying to say. There we go. Buddha is the Mercury avatar for Vishnu. Okay, let's move on. I want to move to George Washington, and then for the last little bit, we'll look at Aurangzeb and Chhatrapati Shivaji. So the first thing I notice is note that first of all, note that the part of fortune is in Aries. And Mars is in Scorpio in an angle. And
opposite the ascendant.
Opposite the ascendant and in Scorpio. And see, the reason, okay, so when you were talking about the rose and being Venus and Scorpio, and I said, I really think that the things that hurt or things that kind of are overtly weaponous usually belong to Aries. And things that are strategic, the strategic kind of general aspect of Mars is Scorpio, in my opinion. And so
I agree with you. He didn't specify, he just said Mars. I think you're getting more specific and it makes sense.
So in my opinion, this shows that this person was a general.
Because he's strategic.
Because Mars
Do you also, yeah. Do you use degree-based conjunctions? Because a chart ruler is not sign-based, but has a degree-based conjunction with the part of fortune that is in Aries that you mentioned.
No, because it's out of sign. Remember, we use the.
So you don't. You're saying you don't use them. Okay, fair enough.
We use the part of fortune as ascendant, so it needs to be on. It needs to be actually in the same sign for me to see it as a conjunction.
Got it. Okay.
If we use an Aries ascendant, that Venus is going to be in the 12th house, no matter how close she is.
But so it rules 7th house, Aries does, and it rules 12th house.
And it rules the 12th, but notice that the ruler of the 10th is on it. And Saturn and the 10th house represent government and kingdom.
Yes. Okay.
Despite the fact that the Saturn is fallen. Right? So the Saturn is fallen in this chart.
Yeah.
It is. Helped by the Jupiter, who's giving him his exaltation. It's helped by the Mercury, who's giving him his domicile. But especially the Jupiter, because the Jupiter is actually applying to him. The Mercury has moved away. But as you can see, we've got quite a few planets in Saturn signs, in Saturn-related signs. Mercury's in Aquarius. And think about, if you've ever seen George Washington, pictures of him, or not pictures, but you never see him smile. He always looks very, very, very stern, very subdued and very stern. He always looks very serious. And so there's that Saturn on the part of fortune there, even though we've got this exalted Venus. So I think he was also a poet. He also wrote poetry or did music or something like that. Very amorous and did music, loved his wife very much. Very empathetic.
All that goes there. Because that is it's an exalted Venus and it's the ruler of his ascendant.
Very empathetic. This person, very empathetic, but really he is what do we call him in the United States? We call him the father of our country, and that's Saturn or Sun, right? Saturn or Sun are the fathers, and so Saturn is on the part of fortune, the father of our country. So we can definitely see that, and also remember that one of his most famous battles was crossing the Delaware River. Was leading them across the Delaware. There's a famous picture of George Washington in a rowboat or famous picture, like painting. George Washington on a rowboat with this crossing the Delaware. So that's a kind of a seminal moment, this kind of crossing of the Delaware for George Washington. Interestingly enough, he's also known for being extremely honest. There's that whole mythology about not telling a lie, which I think is really interesting. And so here we have Mars in his own sign. So when we have malefics in their own sign, they're more than likely going to act in ways that are more appropriate, or act in ways that are more in better behaved ways, we could say. Okay, so that's okay. But we can see that there's definitely a Mars aspect to George Washington. We can see the connection with the we can see the connection with government, with the Saturn. We can also see, oh, here's the other thing. The ruler of the 10th from the part of fortune is already Saturn, is still Saturn. So that's the other thing. Ruler of the 10th from the part of fortune is Saturn.
Wait,
So-
10th from the part of fortune. So you start counting from the part of fortune. So
Yeah, it's our other ascendant, right? So Taurus is one ascendant, and then our other ascendant is Aries.
but you don't,
But
that
what
doesn't hit
make-
Sagittarius?
Say that again? Are you
That
looking
doesn't
at,
hit Sagittarius? Am I counting wrong? One,
are you looking
two.
at different charts? This should be a Taurus rising chart.
Yeah, no, I'm looking at your screen. I just always count. You start the first, like number one would be where it is, right? So in the 11th. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 8th house, cusp.
Oh, we would be using whole sign. So
Oh, okay, sorry.
yeah, so
got
that's
it.
when we use the part of fortune as the ascendant, we always use whole sign. This is why. See, this is how I use both.
Got
I
it.
use the Alcobaeus regularly, and then I use a whole sign chart using the part of fortune as the ascendant. And see, even in this chart, or rather, especially in this chart, the part of fortune chart is the chart that really shows us what's going on.
So that
This-
would make the Mars ruling the 8th house if we go by the part of fortune as
First
ascendant.
and eighth. First and eighth.
First and 8th, yeah.
And of course, even though we think of the 7th house as battle, the horrors of war would be the 8th house, right?
Yeah.
The difficulties and the horrors and the terrors and the fears and all of that stuff that Mars has to be very, this basically the monster.
And wasn't he also shot? He was the one who was shot, right?
Lincoln
I
was shot.
honestly don't know.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm not that good.
And I'm American. You
Lincoln was shot.
How did he die then?
Yeah, Lincoln was killed. Lincoln was assassinated. Lincoln was assassinated. George Washington, lived a long life. Lived a long life and died. They tried to make him king. They wanted to make him king of the United States or of the colonies, and he refused. And so that's why we have a president and not a king. But they wanted to make a monarch out of him. And I think it's so interesting with this fallen Saturn. The Saturn is really in shitty condition, but there's something that's going on in this chart. It's the Jupiter that's helping. It's the Mars applying to the Mercury rather applying to the Jupiter, and then we've got this Mars that's, like you say, it's opposing the ascendant, and it's really, really strong, and it's in an angle. So I think that when we look at it, we can see some of the elevation. Now that we've, what we might want to do with some of these charts going down the road is what we might want to do later down the road is get a chart and look at everything we've been looking at, right? Including the predictive techniques and things of that nature, because, we could use the time that he's inaugurated. We can use the day that he crossed the Delaware. We can use the Battle of Lexington. We can use all of these different things that we know for him and see how they come across. But one of the main things that we do have for him, and even Vedically, this Mars stays in Scorpio, even when we use sidereally. The Saturn will move to Pisces. The Venus and the Saturn will be together in Pisces, and it will be an Aries rising chart.
Since you
So-
brought up Vedic, can I ask a very quick question? Is this Atma Karaka then? It's the highest degree planet, so it's Venus in this chart?
You would only look for that in a Vedic chart. So you
Right,
would not,
but that's what you look for.
that's where you look for it. But yes, but that is the correct way to find the Atmakaraka. But there's no such thing as an Atmakaraka in Western astrology.
No, I
So
got
the-
you. Cast a sidereal chart.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. It has to be
Oh, I guess
because-
some use tropical, but that never made much sense to me. But
Right, but so that's I mean, Sun is the universal significator for the soul, but specifically in Vedic, right?
Got it.
Remember, there's this whole. You were at that talk that I did about Western versus Vedic.
Yeah.
And I talked about how there is no reincarnation tradition And so much about what the medieval Islamic were doing were separating astrology from the Hindu pagan roots. So they were trying to keep
Yes.
what they thought was important and take away
And then-
all the stuff that was of the infidel. And so
Totally.
anything of reincarnation, anything, because in anything that deals with the soul and not specifically religion, from a non-Aristotelian, remember, they were looking for the soul, but they were using Aristotle's model for the soul. They weren't using the Paramatma model of the soul, the Vedic model of the soul in Hinduism. So that's a really important distinction, because once again, they're trying to make astrology into a natural science. And so they're not, and so if it has any of the pagan Hindu elements, then it's seen as, it's seen as magic or divination, even though magic was used. But they're not polytheists, they are followers of Islam. And so it has to conform to followers of Islam, to what the followers of Islam, of course, during this period, especially the Sasanian Persian period, there's all this flowering of intellectual and artistic and cultural, richness and wealth. But at the same time, once again, anything that goes back to that polytheistic past is going to be shut down.
Yeah.
So,
Makes sense.
so we'll look at one more general. Once again, the part of fortune is in Aries. So part of fortune is in Aries. This time the Mars is in Virgo. Mercury is where? Mercury is in Sagittarius, and there's a separating square between the Mars and the Mercury. And notice that the Mars is in Mercury's sign. Right? So I find that interesting, because that means that the part of fortune, which is an ascendant, the ruler of the part of fortune is in the sign ruled by the ruler of the ascendant. And they're in the separating square. Now, what George Patton was known for was he was a very, very controversial character, known for very, very abusive speech and outspoken and abusive. And he was Patton the one that was fired by Eisenhower, or was by Roosevelt, or I think Patton was either Patton or MacArthur. One of these guys was fired by the president. But Patton was extremely caustic, very caustic, very abusive, could be very abusive. He was known for having kind of a big heart, but also very abusive, very, very aggressive and assertive. So this kind of fits with that. Very critical, very efficiency oriented. All of those things definitely. So we can see that with the Mars in Virgo in connection with the Mercury as well. And same thing with the dead Sirius, with the Mars of the Moon in Capricorn. And look at how there's opposition between the Venus and Saturn here.
Yeah.
So yeah, this was Saturn is a very, very controversial figure. Very, very efficient general, very, very difficult person to work with and deal with, from what I remember from history. So the last two people I'm going to look at are Aurangzeb, who was, like I said, the last important Mughal emperor. And there's some interesting things about him that I think that make this a good chart to work with. First of all, as Mughal emperor, there was no right of succession. And so what was expected was that the children would overthrow the current emperor, and that they themselves would fight to the death for the title, or they would plot against each other. And so Aurangzeb had his father. Okay, first of all, Aurangzeb is the child of Shah Jahan and Mumtaz Mahal. And that's important because Shah Jahan created the Taj Mahal for Mumtaz. Because when she died, she gave him 14 children. Aurangzeb is one of those 14 children. When she died, he was so inconsolable that he created the Taj Mahal for her. So his mother and father are the creator and the inspiration for the Taj Mahal. And a little while after he created the Taj Mahal, he was placed under house arrest in the Red Fort and basically lived the rest of his life in the Red Fort, in like one or two, or like, in a suite of rooms that he could never leave. Meanwhile, Aurangzeb basically set his brother up, who was trying to basically, he wanted to take over the kingdom, but there was also a usurper in another region who wanted to keep their part, that region, for themselves. So the brother went over there ostensibly to get the kingdom back, ended up siding with him. This is Aurangzeb's brother. And then Aurangzeb ends up double-crossing both of them and killing his brother and taking over as emperor. So so this chart has a lot of things. It's got also, Aurangzeb spent most of his life, most of his adult life, he died in 1707. Look at the year he was born. He was born in 1618. He died at 88 years old. He spent 50 or 60 years of his life in war, and especially in the Deccan Plain, in the Deccan Plateau, which is the middle section. So Maharashtra, northern Karnataka, northern Andhra Pradesh. So that middle section of India, he spent almost all of his life basically fighting because he's the main expansionist of the empire. And so, but he had all of this problem holding on to it, especially in the Deccan Plateau. And that's where this guy Shivaji, who I mentioned, who was his main enemy, shows up. So what I thought we'd look at is, first of all, we've got Pisces rising. Okay, so that's interesting, right? And we're also talking about somebody who was a religious fanatic. He destroyed temples. He hated the infidel, destroyed temples, destroyed all kinds of Hindu culture and Hindu things. Made people weren't allowed to pray Hindu-wise in certain Hindu things. He destroyed the Somnath temple in Gujarat.
Mars ruled ninth house cusp.
Mars ruled ninth house. And look at how it's in Virgo. So what's right, what's wrong, what goes where, what doesn't go where.
Yeah. And like with Bruce Lee, it's opposite Jupiter, which I don't know if that actually means this, but to me, I see it as increase, even if there's not a lot of sign-based dignity.
Well,
of the Mars.
It's a little too far, right? Because it's first of all, it's separating and it's out of sign. Right. So I would no longer really see this as an opposition. I wouldn't see Mars and Jupiter in any kind of and I think, and that's important, because one of the things about, in my opinion, more important is the Venus Jupiter. But one of the things that I see a lot with modern astrology is this kind of everything, every aspect works, any aspect works. And it's like, well, does it really? Because can it be opposing? It can't really be a Mars Jupiter because it's a Mars Saturn, right? The main aspect is Mars. Right, it's what's applying. First of all, the most important, right? The most important.
Got it. You're talking about the square,
right? So who's applying to who first, and then if it's out of sign, I don't really. It's kind of like what you were just saying with the part of fortune. No, I don't. If it's out of sign, generally no. I don't take them. I don't use them. And it's like I said, once again, it's because if we look at it as a Mars Jupiter, then we're maybe overlooking them. And look, we've got a Moon Jupiter, we've got a Venus Jupiter, and now we've got this Mars Saturn. I'm really more interested in that. So where is the part of fortune? Oh, the part of fortune is at 20 Virgo. Notice that the Mars is on the part of fortune. So he was given by his father. He was given all of these different tasks to basically expand the empire, because he was so good at working with armies. He was so good at working with armies. He was so good at commanding armies. He was so good at conquering territory. And so here we have that Mars. And so here we have that Mars on the 10th house, on the dealing with conquest. And then look how we also have the ruler of the part of fortune is in Scorpio. So we have a mutual reception between the ruler of the part of fortune and Mars. So once again, I'm not saying that, I won't say that the ascendant isn't important, but what we're seeing is that when we're really looking at the public record of a person, or what their life is really kind of about, it's the part of fortune that starts showing us. Right? What this might show us is that he was, this Jupiter, Venus, this Jupiter that's getting the sextile from Venus and the sextile from the moon, what that might, or the square from the moon, what that might show us is the interest in following the law. Remember, we talked about that, about how Jupiter is pious. Remember, this person is pious.
But did he do that? He followed the law? I thought he killed a bunch of people.
Followed religious law to the letter.
I mean, this Mars Saturn, Saturn's retrograde, right? So who's actually, are they both applying to each?
Yeah.
No, hold on. Are
yeah,
they?
yeah. That's what we call
separating them, right?
Yeah, it's what we call mutually applying. Absolutely. They're mutually applying.
Hmm.
And Saturn rules what? The 11th and the 12th. And see, interesting that the Mars impulse is connected to the ruler of the 12th, the self-undoing. And look at how the Jupiter is there too. Because it's because of the expansionism. It's because of the continuous expansionism that he found himself continuously in quandary after quandary in different military quagmires. And especially between 1640 something and especially during the time that he was involved with Shivaji as an enemy, because what happened was the Deccan Plateau, Shivaji is from that area, and so he would go down there and establish a territory, and Shivaji would create rebels, and they would either ambush the army or they would undo what had already been done. There's a story of Shivaji actually walking into his camp and kidnapping somebody, or no, they had prisoners, walking into his camp as a disguised as something, getting the people who had been kidnapped and bringing them back. And like he supposedly did that more than once, where Shivaji, like we're going to come to Shivaji in a second, but but what you can see here is the ruler of the 12th first is in the 12th. And so we talked about when we have planets in the 12th, that becomes a blind spot of ours, right?
Yeah.
It would be the 7th from the part of fortune, though.
It would, which of course is also battle, right? No, not the 7th.
And the expansion of enemies, I guess.
It's the 6th from the part of fortune.
Is it? Oh.
1, 2, 6, yeah.
All right.
7 from part of fortune is Pisces. So, and remember that the 6th house originally had connection with enemies, and so does the 12th.
Yeah,
right.
It's just hidden versus less hidden.
Right, but before this, there wasn't. It's only maybe up into it's only maybe since the 15th or 16th century that it's been hidden in enemies. Right, so the 6th and the 12th both were connected with enmity. 6th more, it's just 6th more in the Hellenistic period, 12th more up until maybe the 14th or 15th century, and then the 7th house for open and the 12th house for hidden. But at the time,
Was this guy also abused? Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, please continue.
Was this guy also verbally like abusive?
Not so much, but this person was very, very kind of anally retentive to the letter. So I would say not so much abusive, but more kind of bossy, more like, think about it. If you're the emperor, you're used to everybody following your commands all the time. So
Yeah.
highly commanding. Excuse me.
Yeah. I'm just looking at his Sun and Mercury kind of tightly opposing Pluto on the 2nd, 8th axis, Scorpio, Taurus. As a
Mercury's
derived house, sort of what he gets from his, right? 2nd from the 7th.
opposing to Pluto. second from the seventh, it's on the cusp it's right on the cusp of the third from the seventh, right? So keep remembering.
You use like a 5 degrees goes to the
Absolutely.
next house.
Absolutely.
Fair enough.
Yeah, so it'd be more
But
the
still, even then, it's like,
then it's
yeah.
as we speak, or it's the work of our hands, right? Because remember the third house rules the arms and hands, which makes sense. Which makes more sense. You know, he also wrote, you know, I don't want to say necessarily philosophy, but he wrote religious exegesis. He created certain types of weaponry as well.
Yeah.
So there's a skill with creating weaponry. And there's that Mercury Mars thing that we just saw earlier. And so Mercury Mars, we talked about how Mercury Mars is a soldier. Mercury's in Mars's sign. And so we can really see Mercury is the ruler of the part of fortune. So we can really see here how it's really a kind of about this Mercury Mars thing being. Now, one of the things I want to look at is the triplicity rulers. You were asking about how he was, about the way that he spoke, and I was talking about how he was really commanding. And there's this thing in the 10th house, if you remember when we looked at the 10th house, it talked about the voice of command. The triplicity rulers talked about the voice of command. Hold on a second. Because this person was a commander. So of the 10th.
You're looking for triplicity rulers of the 10th house?
The first ruler, triplicity of the
Jupiter.
Exaltations and elevation to a higher seat of authority and to the higher dwelling. Okay, so it's nighttime, right?
So it's Jupiter, no? Or do you not use Dorothean triplicity rulers? Like, who are you using?
I mean, yeah, Dorothean.
Cool. So fire by night, Jupiter.
Sun, Jupiter, Saturn. Is it daytime?
No, but you flipped it for nighttime.
Oh, so it's Sun first. Okay, so Sun represents. First triplicity. First of all, let me read out what it says. The first triplicity ruler represents exaltations and the elevation to a higher seat of authority and to the highest dwelling, and that's the Sun, who's with the Mercury. The second Lord signifies the voice of command and the audacity of the same, and that's the Jupiter. And the third signifies the stability and durability, and that would be the Saturn. So the voice of command is this Jupiter. Now, interestingly enough, obviously the Jupiter would show that the voice of command would obviously be there'd be a largesse to it, right? Or something major, but it's in the 12th. And so that kind of also shows, once again, when I'm saying this issue of expansionism, he was basically tasked to expand the empire, and he did. Almost the entire Indian subcontinent was under Mughal rule at some point during Aurangzeb's rule. However, much of it wouldn't stay. And so he consistently had to go to different parts of the kingdom in order to keep people at bay, to keep the usurpers at bay. And so I'm wondering if that Mars-Saturn has something to do with that. Note that the Mars is within 5 degrees of the 7th house cusp. So that could put him in the 7th of enemies. Mars is on the part of fortune, right? And so that's giving a Martian aspect or a Martian tint to whatever is going on with the public life or with the work life or with the life path, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
I thought you might want to see something interesting. Okay, so we're talking about the part of fortune and enemies, right? So enemies. So would there maybe be a connection between him? So we look at the 12th house. We can look at we can look at the 12th house. We can look at the part of fortune in the 7th. So would there be a connection between him and Shivaji with enemies? Here's Shivaji's chart. Oh wait, it's not that one. It's this one. Do you remember what degree was rising? Do you remember what degree was the part of fortune in the last chart? The degree of the part of fortune in the last chart was 16 degrees, was 18 degrees or 20 degrees of Virgo. So, okay. And do you remember where the Jupiter was and what the 12th house cusp was?
It was I don't know the degree, but
20
yeah, 24.
28 Aquarius. And here's this part of fortune. So note here that his part of fortune is on the cusp of Aurangzeb's 12th house, and his ascendant is on Aurangzeb's part of fortune. Here's Aurangzeb's part of fortune at 20 Virgo, and 8 degrees of Aquarius is the cusp of the, remember the part of fortune there was 11 degrees of Aquarius. The part of the ascendant in Shivaji's chart is 20 degrees, 16 degrees of Virgo. And then his Jupiter is at 24 degrees of Aquarius. So we can see the connection between the two charts based on enmity. And once again, based on the part of fortune as a more important thing than just the ascendant. Here's Shivaji the Great, super, super clever, super valiant, one of the most valiant, clever, interesting, just the things that and daring, just amazingly daring. And look at that Mars fallen in the 10th house. So once again, are we dealing with it, right? Are we dealing with an issue of overcompensation? Notice that the moon is in Venus's sign, but Venus is in Mars's sign. Right? There's no reception to make this Mars more Mars. Well, there is, isn't there?
Saturn.
Yes, there's a reception to make this Mars a little more Mars. And who is Saturn? What's the importance of Saturn in this chart?
Is it a day chart? Yeah.
Different from that.
No.
Night
What?
chart.
Oh, simpler from that?
Yeah, that's true, but that's not what I'm asking for. What is Saturn's significance in this chart?
It has a mutual reception with
No.
Mars.
No, it's got there's reception, but not a mutual reception. Saturn is Saturn is the ruler of the part of fortune.
Oh, it is.
Saturn is the ruler of the part of fortune, and Mars is receiving. Mars is able, and Mars is in a trine with reception with Saturn. Saturn is giving Mars Mars. Even though he's retrograde, Saturn is giving it to him. So this Mars gets helped by the part of fortune. Do you notice? Remember, we had here in this chart, Aurangzeb, we've got Mars on the part of fortune. We've got Mars in mutual reception with the part of fortune, with the ruler of the part of fortune. Here in the Shivaji chart, we've got Mars in reception, in reception with the ruler of the part of fortune. And we've got this Jupiter right on the, so we can see possibly that this is the secret enemy, right? So if we want to look at the 12th house ruler as the secret enemy, right? Jupiter, or the 12th house as the secret enemy, Jupiter is the 12th house enemy. Jupiter is in the 12th house for Aurangzeb, and sure enough, this, and mind you, Shivaji became king of that area afterwards. So they ended up successfully kicking Aurangzeb out, and Shivaji became king. So I just think this is a fascinating chart. Definitely interesting how this Mars in Cancer. He was excellent. He was excellent with speech. This person, Shivaji, was excellent at convincing people of things, excellent at talking his way into things, etc. So if you're interested in any interesting, like I learned this when I was selling tours to India, when I was living in Texas. The man who owned the company, he said, you want stories about knights and stuff like that? he's like, I don't know why the fuck people are talking about Europe, because India has that in spades. He's like, you want monuments and fabulous architecture? What the hell are you going to Europe for? India, dude. And